Hello and welcome to Longship Gaming. Today we are talking about Shadows of the Galaxy, which is set 2 of the Star Wars Unlimited TCG. Some time ago I did a video about wanting to get into it and hoping that stores in our area actually picked up on it, and lo and behold, they did in a big way. After the game ended up being very popular, most of the local gaming stores here in Toronto got on board and have been holding events, showdowns, draft nights, the whole deal. So, in this coming week, there is going to be the pre-release for Shadows of the Galaxy, and probably about 2 weeks when they have the supply to do so, we'll be looking at an entirely new draft environment. So, as an introduction to this video, this is part 1. This is focusing on the leaders, and then in part 2 I'm going to look at the commons and uncommons that you're most likely want to draft or focus on drafting for set 2. So, just to point out, this is a draft analysis. It's not necessarily for sealed. Sealed is a very different limited environment. You don't have a lot of choice. You are basically given your 6 packs. And you choose from those leaders and those cards that you open. Sometimes you have a really good sealed, a synergistic one. Sometimes you don't, and you basically just have to play with what you have. There is some, of course, crossover between draft and sealed in terms of the choices you're going to make, particularly with the leaders. So you can take some elements of these 2 videos to enhance your sealed. So I may do another video after I do the pre-release sealed just to go over my decision making for that. But sealed is also not likely to be a format that is played in a lot of stores after the pre-release. The stock just isn't probably going to be there for set 2. So draft is probably where you're going to be getting most of your cards for set 2 due to its overall short print compared to demand. So where I'm coming from, at this point I've done about 15 plus in-person drafts of set 1 and done some force table self-training. Force table is good, and I'll of course link to it. But it's not the be-all and end-all because it is machine learning. You're not playing against another person. But it is, you get a good feel for the flow of drafting in general. And the one thing, of course, is the force table. The AI doesn't value draft. It just drafts as it would if you were just looking to try and do as well as you can during that. So this is thanks to Face-to-Face Games here in Toronto. I will link to them as well. If you're in the Toronto area, we do, or I should say they hold, but I've been attending almost every week, drafts on Wednesday evenings. They are a great environment. They've been fantastic hosts, and I look forward to doing more of it. So, again, I've done a lot of drafts. I've pretty much done every draft since they started for the past few months, and it's been a lot of fun. The games have largely, of all the drafts I've done, been best of 3. There's been a couple of one-offs for special events that were best of 1s, but this is where I'm coming from when you're playing this. I don't like best of 1 generally. I don't think it's one. You don't really get your value out of doing best of 1. You don't really feel like if you have a bad 1 game, but you feel that your deck is fairly strong that you've put together, you don't really have a choice to or a chance to redeem what you've done. So there's no real learning there in a best of 1 environment. So 90% of what I've done is best of 3. And on average, I would say I'm a 2-1. There are always 3 games, or 3 matches, I should say. Generally a 2-1. I think I've only gone like 1 0-2 drop. Almost every time I play it's been a 2-1 and a couple of really solid 3-0s. So I'm not saying I'm the best at it, but I think that I'm a solid B student. Overall, so take that for what you will. Again, not a professional, just a motivated casual. I don't play in competitive. Well, there is no competitive environment yet for draft. Maybe one day, we'll see. But for now, it's our casual game nights for drafting. And yeah, I do it for fun. Um, I didn't collect any stats about how I did for set 1, but I will start tracking that for set 2 just to compare my own performance going forward. Like, I will keep track of the drafts I've done and what cards I've been playing, because I want to see whether or not my evaluation of the cards in set 2 are actually accurate. So, draft basics, just a quick introduction to those who are not familiar with the draft environment. So I subscribe to the Baron acronym, which is an adaptation of the Magic Bread acronym. I think this was put forward by Tower Number 9, another YouTube creator. Stands for bombs, ambush, removal, opening, and nice to haves. Bombs, well, those are generally your rares and legendaries, very powerful cards that will, basically warp the game itself when you get them out. Ambush, any units with ambush are high priority, generally because they are basically a form of removal against units on a stick. If they can ambush, take something off the board on one activation, you don't have to spend 2 actions to play it and then wait another turn and attack with it. It comes in, it does something immediately. I consider it in some ways removal, just removal on a stick. So the idea that the body can still stick around, you can have someone on the board. Removal, these are your cards like Vanquish or Open Fire and so on that just do direct damage, can remove things off the board without having to play out a unit to do it. Opening, these are your 1 and 2 resource cards that you play right at the start of the game. These are, of course, important because if you don't have a play on turn 1, then you're already going to be behind the 8 ball in this game. So, generally you want 7 to 8, depending on your deck composition, opening cards to be able to play. And nice to have. So these are ones that are like, well, this sort of works with the theme of my deck, or I need to fill out the 30. I need to get to the 30 card minimum for being able to play my my limited deck. They're not great, but they're nice. They're fine. There isn't, unlike in Magic, a lot of dross cards where you're just like, I will never play this card. It's terrible. But we will in part 2 of this video, when we look at the individual cards, there are some that are just strictly pretty bad in the environment. Luckily, spoiler alert, most of the cards are not bad in the limited environment, but sometimes you just have to put them in your deck and deal with it to be able to get to your 30. So be aware of the drafted leaders in your pod. So have a quick look around to your right and your left, maybe 2 on each side, not all the way around, but I will point out that when it comes to a certain leader, that you need to be aware of who you're competing with, and there's a good chance that you're going to be competing with a lot of people over this one leader during the draft. So it's good to be aware of what the other drafted leaders are. I tend to value high toughness leaders that come out high hit points. I should change that. Leaders. They come out no later than turn 7. Now, luckily, in Shadows of the Galaxy, there are no leaders that come out after 7. They come out on 7. 5 or 6 is probably your sweet spot. And of course, high HP means they stick around and they can just do more during the game. I tend to limit my aspects during the leader draft, and that's usually along the lines of not the colored aspects, but between villainy and heroic. It's just a method that's been working for me really well. So if I open up what I think is, a strong heroic or villainy leader, if I'm past the next one, I will almost always just take something. Even if the leader isn't that great, I will take something in villainy or heroic to match that, and hopefully by the third one I'll get past the same. But at least I've made that choice. If I can't make that choice, if I've chosen a villainy leader and I get past to heroic, for example, I'll take the one that closely matches my my colored aspect, like an aggression one, 2 aggression ones. to limit my choices during the draft. And even if that's not possible, I sort of take one that is a complementary color, and that really has more to do with knowing what the cards are in the draft and which aspects are likely to be most powerful. And that information I think will come in part 2 of this video. I tend to lock in where I am in my aspects by the middle of the first pack. I buy about 5 or 6 cards in. As early as that, I think early as 6, maybe around 7, I've already locked in what my aspects are. It makes your choices a lot easier going on. You don't want to be in a position where you're pivoting past that point. You're only opening 42 cards. So you really have to focus to get to your 30. You don't have a lot of wiggle room. And it's better to have choice within your aspect than to not have any choice whatsoever and end up having to place something out of aspect and paying that aspect cost, resource cost. So I decide very early and I just live with it. And so far it seems to be working pretty well. I tend to, I don't splash. And by splashing here is not the magic term of splashing. So if I'm running aggression and command, so a blue-green deck, and I have what I think is a good blue card in villainy, or just in vigilance on its own, I'm not splashing them. There are very, very few cards in the limited environment that are worth doing it. I'm not saying that they're all bad. There's one I think in this set that is extremely strong that could be played with the tax and be fine. But there are no cards in this set that are double aspects that, like Vigilance, Cunning, Aggression, the 2 resource cards, that are worth splashing in this environment. Those are very strong legendaries in set 1 that if I was in one of those colors, I would not mind paying the resource tax of the extra 2 for it. But in this case, that's extremely rare, and for most commons and uncommons, I would not touch splashing for that, because generally the return is not worth it. So my overall ratings, and this continues on through the individual cards, or the commons and uncommons in video number 2. I'm doing the same thing for the leaders. I'm rating them just on just a 3-point scale. I had them more, I originally did it a little more organic than that, but I decided in the end just to stick with 3. So, rated 1, the absolute best, the one that you actually want to be focusing on. Think Boba Fett in set 1. Just, it warps your draft and you're locked into Cunning Villainy, but in a limited environment like in the Constructed, Boba was extremely strong. Number 2 are playables. Perfectly playable cards. More dependent on the strength of your draft itself, but entirely fine with excellent abilities that will come into play during the game. And rank number 3, avoid these if all possible, unless you want to play in hard mode. Now look, you could say this about IG-88 and Hera, let's say, or Chewbacca or so on in set 1. But sometimes your draft is so strong you can overcome the limitations of a quote-unquote bad leader. This happened to me, actually the 2 drafts that I went 3-0 on during set 1 were IG-88 and Chewbacca, just because the accompanying draft was so strong. So, rank 3, the ones I say to avoid, take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes they can actually do a lot of excellent work, but is highly dependent on the strength of your actual draft. So, we're going to split this up into common leaders and rare leaders. So, you're of course going to see the commons much more frequently than you will the rares. So, starting off here, and it pains me to say so because, one, I really like the character, and I think that the art is one of the best pictures in the game. Really captures her as a character, but unfortunately, it's Fennec Shand. So I've rated her as a 3 to avoid if possible. She has relatively weak stats, and the cost to ambush is prohibitive. So, just to go over her abilities, she has an action, costs 1 resource and exhaust. Play a unit that costs 4 or less from your hand, paying its cost, and give it ambush for this phase. Okay, so basically a costly ECL built into your character, or your leader, I should say. But she comes out on 5, which is early, but she's only a 4/4 with Saboteur. Now, mind you, after that, she has an action to play a unit with 4 or less from your hand, paying its cost, and give it ambush. That's a repeatable action. She doesn't have to exhaust to do it, but it's unlikely by the turn she comes out that she's going to have a lot of ambush like units to be able to play. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, the 4 or less is very limited, especially in late game. She's not likely to survive on the board for very long. And Saboteur, you know, on a 4/4, I don't know. I just don't see her making an impact at all. I would not be particularly happy to be opening her in my draft. So Bosk is a very strong 2. I was sort of vacillating between putting him in as a rank 1, but I really think that he sits in that extremely playable portion of the pool. He's got okay stats for a turn 5. He's got 4/6, which is about what you would expect for a usual 5-cost unit. Very bounty dependent, but there are very good ones at the common and uncommon level that you can exploit, and he really does warp your draft, though, to be prioritizing getting ways to put bounties on enemy units. So to go over him, his action is to exhaust, deal 1 damage to a unit with a bounty. You may give it +1 for this phase. Okay, so deal 1 damage to a unit with a bounty. You may give it. So you're usually doing this to do damage to bounties you've placed on enemy characters. You may give it, so you could even put this on your own if your own characters have a bounty to make them more powerful. Usually you're just using that +1 damage against your opponent. As a unit, comes out with a 4/6 on 5, which is good and early. 6 is sticky for turn 5, and when you collect a bounty, you may collect that bounty again. Use this ability only once each round. Very potent, but again is highly dependent on how you've constructed your draft. In limited as well, that will be difficult. I think Boss is going to be very strong in constructed. I think he is entirely passable as a common leader in draft, but you really do have to go out of your way to draft bounties to make use of him, and you kind of have to decide that early and maybe picking bounties over more valuable units to place on the board. Next one is Hondo. Unfortunately, Hondo, as much as I like that character, love the art and everything, I'm giving him an avoid, so a rank of 3. He's got okay stats, comes out on 6, he's got a 3/7, he's a raid, so he himself does some work, so on attack he's a 4/7. But he is extremely smuggle dependent to get any use out of him whatsoever. So when you play a card using smuggle, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, give an experience token to your unit, which sounds good. When you play a card using smuggle, you may give an experience token to a unit. Same thing. So he's got a passive ability on both, really, and it's unlimited number of times you can do that in a turn. But there are, of course, you're never really going to be smuggling that many cards on the same turn. Because he's so smuggle dependent, there are only about 14, I believe, at my count, common or uncommon cards that you smuggle, because smuggle tends to be very expensive. If you played a lot of draft, you realize most games are done by about round 6 or 7. You go much longer than that, you're going to start running out of cards in general. So I'm not saying it's impossible to do this, but with the expense of a lot of the smuggle cards, I don't necessarily see it being something that you want to sort of focus on. But again, there's always a chance. You might just get a lot of smuggle cards and decide to go with them. Again, he himself is not bad as a unit. But yeah, the smuggle thing is probably at best going to occur maybe once, maybe twice during the course of your game. And this, of course, always depends on if this format is slower than in set 1. We'll have to see. And as I said before, with Bosk, this is going to warp your draft significantly. Choosing him as a leader will push you towards smuggle cards. Just like with Bosk, you're being pushed towards bounty. But I think in this case, smuggle is much harder to pull off in a limited environment. Gar Saxon, putting him as a 2, perfectly playable. Very upgrade dependent, solid stats though, comes out on 6 with a 4/7. Warps your draft like the other ones. Prioritize common and uncommon upgrades or ways to get experience or shield. And luckily there are a lot of ways to do that. I think that Gar giving each friendly upgraded unit +1, including himself. And then, of course, on his unit side, when defeated, you may return an upgrade that was attached to this unit to its owner's hand, is a good way to maintain, well, basically to maintain card advantage over time. Mind you, your hand might fill up with upgrades, but that's fine. Also, you know, each friendly upgraded unit, bounties are upgrades. So if you're playing against a bounty heavy enemy, they'll give you a little bit of health overall. Now, of course, that can also backfire on you because you may return an upgrade that was attached to this unit to its owner's hand. Oh, may. Okay, so then you're not going to get screwed by that. You can just basically say, no, you're not getting your bounty back to put it on another one of my units. I think very solid. Has a potential actually to be very good. I think Vigilance cards in this set are pretty good. Not the best, not compared to, I believe, Cunning and Aggression, but we'll see that in our next video. But I think Gar Saxon is perfectly playable, especially if you're already playing with another villain. Han Solo, putting him perfectly playable, but going to be very aggressive. Okay stats for a turn 5. He's got a 3/6, so he's a bit sticky. Doesn't hit very hard. Very strong tempoing ability though with his play unit from your hand. It costs 1 less, deal damage to it. Now of course you got to prioritize those 3+ hit point cards and grit at the common and uncommon level. I think he can be very potent, and of course on his hero side he can do that without having to exhaust. You can play the unit from your hand, it costs 1 less, deal 2 damage to it, and you can do that an unlimited number of times. So yeah, prioritizing those 3+ hit point and grit characters, I think he has the potential to be very aggressive, but you really have to build around units that can survive coming out early. But very strong, very, very strong tempo. Moving on to Rey. Good cards with 2 or less power. There are quite a few of them, and there are some strong turn 1 plays in this set. So her action costs 1, exhaust, give an experience token to a unit with 2 or less power. Again, there are a lot of very good 2 or less, especially in Vigilance. I think that she could be quite the contender. I mean, it's like Tarkin's ability from set 1, but not limited to Imperial. Or sorry, not limited to villainy. So or Imperial. My goodness, I haven't actually used him in a draft very often, so I can't believe I'm forgetting that. But anyway, there is no limitations. You can put it on anybody. And as you can see, when she comes out at 6 and she has a 2/6, again, very sticky, you can basically, on her attack, give an experience token with a unit of 2 or less power. So on her attack, on the turn she comes out, she can go to a 3/7. Her Restore 3, of course, is very significant. So she'll be a 3/7 on turn 6, Restore 3, which is really good. Now, her hitting power, at least off the start, not so great. But, I mean, that's on attack, an experience token. So she won't be able to, of course, do that on her any subsequent turn, but you will probably have a lot of stuff out there with 2. But in late game may not matter so much. You may have already put enough tokens so that ability won't really matter anymore. I think she's going to be very solid. Great choice for going long, I think, in games, especially that fantastic Restore 3. So Boba Fett. So I was vacillating on him a bit when I first evaluated him, but I ended up putting him as a top tier. Solid stats coming out of 6 with a 4/7. When you play a unit that has 1 or more keywords, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, give a friendly unit +1 for this phase. So almost every card in the game has at least 1 keyword. Exhaust him, you may, if you do, give a friendly unit. So the good thing there is you don't have to give it to the unit that you just played. You can give it to another unit that's on the board. He's got, as I said, solid stats. Comes out in a 6 with a 4/7. So as of, can stick around. Each other friendly unit that has 1 or more keywords gets +1. So there's no choice. Just everybody gets a little boost. And again, almost every unit has a keyword. So, and as I said, keyword dependent, very easy to do at the common and uncommon level. You really can't go too wrong with him. And a very powerful unit side. So I think, between him and our next leader, this is where the competition really is going to lie. And that's Cad Bane. So I don't think there's going to be much difference between how popular Cad Bane is going to be in Limited as he will be in Constructed. He has amazing stats for coming out of 6, a 2/8 with Raid 2. When you play an Underworld card on his leader side, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, an opponent chooses a unit that control, deal 1 damage to it. I wasn't too big on that choose part, but the thing is, they still have to do it. And so having damage out there is better than not having any damage out there. Underworld is an incredibly common keyword, especially in Villainy and especially in Cunning. You're not going to have any difficulty pulling this off. On his leader unit side, the Raid 2 is significant. When you play an Underworld card, you may choose an opponent that they choose a unit they control, deal 2 damage to it, and use this ability only once each round. Again, just getting rewarded to do damage just for playing your cards. And of course, you're going to have a lot of Underworld cards in general in Cunning. Amazing. So I did say here the choice could be a problem, right? Giving your opponent a choice of where to put that, so they knock off a shield or put it onto a unit that has grit or something like that. That can be tough. I think there is that grit counterplay. But I really do think that when you are in a draft, you are going to be fighting over Cad. If you choose that as if you're lucky enough to open them, and that's the one you've chosen, if someone else is doing it, they're not passing Cad Bane generally. So, I've had drafts where there were like people opened 3 or 4 Bobas, and of course everybody's fighting over Villainy and Cunning at that point. I think the same thing is going to happen with Cad Bane. Now, luckily, with 2 other really solid common leaders in Solo and Boba Fett. It may not be so bad, but my prediction is, yeah, see a lot of fighting over Cad Bane, for sure. So moving on to our rare leaders. And again, much like I was sad with, or sad for Fennec Shand, Dr. Aphra. Dr. Aphra is a great character from the comics. I just don't think that she is going to make much of a difference at all in the draft environment. So her leader side, when the regroup phase starts, discard a card from your deck. In limited, you generally only have 30 cards. There is no restock in set 2. You're basically throwing cards away. As an epic action, if you control 5 or more resources, she comes out and she's only a 2/5, which is extraordinarily weak. When there are 5 or more different costs among your cards in the discard pile, this unit gets +3. So then she becomes a 5/5. If you have 5 or more different costs amongst cards in your discard pile, at that point when she comes out, you're not going to have that. When deployed, choose 3 cards in your discard pile with different names. If you do, return one of them at random to your hand. So that makes it even harder for her to become tough. Or, sorry, not tough, but actually have any more power and to stand up with anything else at 5 or even 6. She'll just get wiped off the board. But choosing 3 cards in your discard pile with different names, if you do, return one of them at random to your hand with no discount. It's random. It actually works. It's a non-bow against her ability. I don't get this card. This feels to me like definitely a card for future constructed sets where there's more discard or discard matters, because right now discard is not good in limited. There are very few cards that actually give you any kind of reward. So like if you went with her, you better hope that you get Kylo Ren's tie, because, but then again, that's working against her. It's working against her ability. I mean, that she enables it, but it's still not very good. And it's the only card I can think of. Maybe if you have MIGs and that locks you always into aggression and cunning. I think that, I don't know. This card is just absolutely, sadly, dreadful. At least in a limited environment. So I don't think you're going to ever be in a position where you're going to be playing with her. You'd have to have an extraordinarily strong draft to even consider running her if you really wanted to be in those colors. Or at least in cunning and villainy, I should say. So Lando, so here we have a thing, and you're going to see a trend here amongst the rare leaders. So again, not exactly sure what this card would have any benefit at all in a limited environment. So action on his leader side, exhaust, play a card using smuggle. It costs 2 less. Defeat a resource you own and control. So, okay. Makes smuggle cards cheaper, but then you're defeating a resource, so you're going to be down resources. Now, mind you, he comes out at 4, and he's a 2/5, so he's got a bit of a body at 4. But his action is play a card using smuggle. It costs 2 less. Defeat a resource you own and control. Use this ability only once per round. So I don't really understand right now where this card fits. It certainly doesn't fit in limited. You're defeating your own resources. So you're shorting yourself for future turns to play out smuggle cards. And the smuggle cards that we have, smuggle is generally overpriced. I'm not seeing the benefit here. At least, again, not in draft. And I know a lot of people have commented how they don't really see him functioning very well right now in the constructed environment. So we'll see. And as I said, with Hondo, smuggle focus warps the draft. There are more heroic and generic smuggles at common and uncommon, but still, I don't get it. Losing resources just feels really bad. Maybe only in the late game. But by that point, I think you've already lost it, because you're basically, Lando was doing absolutely nothing for you for most of the game. Again, I'm assuming there's something will happen in the future where smuggle, there'll be other ways to enable smuggle, but right now, this seems like it's a future proofing card. Next, Kylo Ren. I'm putting him at a 3 as well, so best to, I feel, avoid him. Discard a card from your hand, give a unit +2 for this phase. Again, he's a very aggressive card in villainy, just absolutely pure aggro, but of course you are discarding from your hand for minimal benefit. You will be having difficulty actually having cards to be able to play out, and discarding. And of course the cards that synergize with discarding, which are Migs and Kylo's own TIE Fighter. I mean, they're rare and legendary, and at the common level, this is not going to be useful for you whatsoever. He does come out at 4, and he has a 5/4, but it's not really a 5/4. This unit gets -1 for each card in your hand. So the more cards you have, the less powerful he'll be, but not having choice in your hand. We all know that in most card games, having a lot of choice in your hand is very valuable. I think he works best on his leader side, not his actual leader unit side. But within the limited environment, you don't want to be just discarding and having a low hand size all the time for really absolutely no benefit. As I said, there really is no discard synergy, so I would stay far away from Kylo in any draft environment. Hunter, again, pains me to say because I like the Bad Batch. He does have some things going for him, but I don't think in this particular case he is going to be all that functional in a limited environment. As an action on his leader side, costs 1 resource, reveal a resource you control. If it shares a name with a friendly unique unit, return the resource to its owner's hand and put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. Okay. Fine. There are potent unique units that are out there, especially if they're ones that you're sort of firing off and forgetting and you expect them to die and you just want to be able to use their ability right away. But remember, this is reveal. So you're giving your opponent a lot of information about what might be coming. Good stats, though. Comes out a bit late on 7. As late as I can ever consider. But he's a 5/8, so he's got a good sticky body with Overwhelm. Pretty solid, just begs for a lot of upgrades. On attack, you may reveal a resource you control. If it shares the name of the friendly unique unit, return the resource to its owner's hand and put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. So same thing, just on attack and not costing you the resource to do it. But again, we are talking about a limited environment. And these are focusing on friendly, unique units in multiples. You are very unlikely to have this in a draft. So I would not be choosing Hunter at any point. His ability just will not function unless you were extremely lucky and open multiple very quality, uniquely named characters. It is, some card advantage and some backup to very potent unique characters or units, but overall, it's unlikely you're going to get any use out of it whatsoever. Finn, unfortunately as well, you see a trend here with all these rare leaders. He's a 3. He has pretty standard stats, so it comes out on 5 with a 4/6, which is pretty good. On his leader side, as an action, defeat a friendly upgrade on a unit. If you do, give a shield token to that unit. Okay. On his leader unit side, on attack, you may defeat a friendly upgrade on a unit. If you do, give a shield token to that unit. Same thing. Not particularly exciting. He doesn't really even have any keywords that function off a lot of cards in the set so far. So Fringe and Trooper, at least in set 2. I mean, this again feels to me like it's a future ability. It's a strange trade-off between upgrades, usually experience and shield, and there are not that many at common and uncommon, or UE, whatever that is. I misspelled uncommon, or UC. That's terrible. Anyway, yeah, I don't see any real synergy. I mean, it will warp your draft if you do choose to go with Finn to find one character or cards that give out shield and experience, but it's so incredibly situational. I can't. I don't. I'm not. I don't know where he stands, but he certainly doesn't do very well, in my opinion, in a draft environment. Kira. Okay, so this was a tough one. I will accept that I may be proven wrong with this going forward. I put her in the avoid category as well. She comes out on 5. Well, first we'll go over her leader ability. So it's an action, a cost of 1, deal 2 damage to a friendly unit, then give a shield token to it. So now you're looking at, you know, units that can take that hit. Shield token on it, fine. I'm not too annoyed by that. It gives them some survivability. But really, you want to play. You need grit. You want grit units. Unfortunately, and I went and had a look, there are only 4 playable in her colors or generic at common uncommon. So there is not a lot of grit that she can actually make use of. When she comes out on 5, which is pretty early, she comes out effectively as a 4/4. So when deployed, heal all damage from each unit, then deal damage to each unit equal to half its remaining hit points rounded down. So playing this, I can see situations where you have a very strong board in general. Your opponent has an okay board, so let's say you've got a bunch of shielded units that for some reason they're not trying to get rid of. You have a bunch of units out there, preferably grit units, but again, there aren't very many. And then they hit themselves. I mean, against really low health, like 1s or 2s, it's rounded down. So against the 3, that only drops it down to 2. I'm not seeing where she functions very well in a limited environment. I may be wrong about this one. I'll have to see. It's a really difficult one to evaluate because it really depends upon your board state. But one thing for sure is you are not playing any cards with a hit points less than 3, to be honest. But we'll see. Again, I could accept I could be completely wrong, and she may actually be very good. I look forward to trying that at some point. So I think the best of the rare leaders really is Jabba. He comes out late, but with a massive 212 body. My goodness. His action on his leader side is choose a unit for this phase that gains bounty. The next unit you play this phase costs 1 less. So getting a discount with putting a bounty. So here's the important thing. Putting a bounty on enemy units is powerful. Considering there are so many cards out there that actually do care about triggering bounties. So when he's deployed on his 7 side, he's a 212, so he's going to be sticking around. You put some upgrades on him, and he becomes a real terror to try and get off the board. When deployed, another friendly unit captures an enemy non-leader unit. So here we have our first mention of capture in all the leaders. By 7, more than likely you've got something kind of beefy out there, and being able to basically have another friendly unit capturing an enemy non-leader unit is pretty powerful, and that's across both lanes or arenas. As an action, you can choose a unit for this phase. Same thing, gains bounty, but the next unit you play this phase costs 2 less. So you're not likely ever really attacking much of Jabba. You're just using his bounty ability, and then playing cards that actually do affect and want to collect that bounty. Getting a 2 discount by 7, it's very rampy. So let's say that you're able to do that. As next unit you play this phase, so the bounties also have to take place during that phase. You have to have something ready to go to deal that damage, to get more characters out. So the ideal situation is that you're playing him. You're always going to have to be playing him first, so he's going to have some survivability to be able to use his ability. But then that's still 2 turns before he... Yeah, I mean... Or sorry, 3, not turns, but 3 actions. So playing him out, he captures something. Next activation, choose a unit, give it a bounty. Next action, use a hefty unit that you have on your side to take out that bounty and get the benefit for the next card you play on the next action. So it's basically 4 actions to get him to a place on the turn that he comes out where he actually is able to get a benefit. So it's not till the 5th action when you actually play that cheaper unit. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it has to happen in a certain order. So this is why I'm not putting him at 1. I think he's going to be potent, but I do feel that this is it's going to be interesting to see where he lands in a limited environment. I wouldn't shy away from playing him, but I think that you really have to, again, warp your draft to be able to get that that bounty value out of him. So, you know, I think he's going to be just fine. But amongst the rare leaders, he's probably the best of them. Although, that said, Bo-Katan, glad to see her actually, you know, be a pretty solid leader. On her leader side, as an action, if you attack to the Mandalorian unit this phase, deal 1 damage to a unit, which is pretty good. There are a lot of Mandos in this set, both in the colors that she's in and across all of them, including the no aspect at all. There's one, but you have to, of course, have attacked first with the Mandalorian unit. She comes out on 6. She's got great stats. She's a 4/7, so she's sticky. On attack, you may deal 1 damage to a unit, and if you attacked with another Mandalorian unit, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. So basically, she can, you know, as long as she goes second, she does 2 damage on attack before she's actually doing the damage. So she's very aggressive that way. Highly dependent, of course, on the Mandalorian keywords, but because they exist on, you can, you know, with Foundling, you can make things into Mandalorians in a pinch. There are a lot of good Mandalorians in red, to say the least. Sadly, of course, there's also some excellent ones in Villainy, which she probably is not going to be playing, but or she won't be playing. But there's a good number of Mandalorian opportunities at common and uncommon. It's just the sequencing sometimes can be a little tricky. But I think those consistent pings can really add up, especially if she stays on the board, especially if she ends up getting a lot of upgrades on her. So that about covers it. I mean, I feel that there's going to be competition in heroic. So 4 of the 5 top leaders are in heroic. So there's going to be a lot of competition for that. But Cad Bane, I think, is going to be the most popular. Much like, as I said, Boba in set 1. So there's going to be a lot of competition for cunning across everybody. Cunning itself, as we'll see in video number 2, or part 2 of this draft guide, a lot of competition. But villainy is likely to be much more open than heroic. I mean, we'll see how it turns out. We'll see once I get a lot of these under my belt and I can evaluate what's happened over time, because we'll have quite a few months of draft before set 3 for this, and I look forward to playing every single one of them for the foreseeable future. Well, thanks very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the video, and look forward to part 2, which will be a more in-depth look at commons and uncommons for Shadows of the Galaxy, broken down by aspect, and how good, again, on that same, 1 being the absolute best and 3 best to avoid, where they're going to land on that spectrum. Keeping in mind, of course, everything I just said in part 1. And hope, for those who are doing the sealed this for the pre-releases, I hope this actually can give you some help. Because as I said, I think that even sealed, CAD is probably going to be the one that you're going to be facing the most if they happen to open it across 6. It's likely across 6, opening 6 packs, that they're going to get it. But it all depends, of course, on the rest of the pack. So, as I said, thanks very much for watching, and until next time, happy gaming. Thank you so much for watching Longship Gaming. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It will really help the channel to grow and improve. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when more Longship Gaming content goes live. Until next time, happy gaming.